Hello and welcome to Oz Connection, the official YouTube channel for OzCon International. I'm your Aussie host, Sam Milazzo, and I have with me two special guests with a very special project we'll be talking about soon. I present to you my friend and fellow artist, a classic old-school traditional oil painter, Vincent Myrand, with his business partner, Greg Hall. Thank you both for being here, guys.
Thanks
Thank
for
you for
having
having us,
us.
Sam. Certainly appreciate it.
Oh, you're
Yeah.
welcome. I'm glad that Colin has arranged this so that we can all talk together and get some more Oz talk out there and definitely just bring some more attention back to Baum's Oz. And we'll
Oh,
get to
indeed.
your project in a moment. So my first question is, how did your Oz interests get you two connected?
Shall I? I'll start just because I was the one
Thank
who
you.
reached out. I was looking for. I had hired Marissa Beddoes to do a small thing on TikTok at the time, a little promo for it where she was singing who she's going to be, Ozma. But I needed a visual background for part of it, and I needed specifically. If you look at this little painting up there, you can see some of that Tip and Ozma up there dancing. It's a kind of a little dance sequence. So I was looking around and I'd seen Vince's work, and so I contacted him and I said, "Would you be interested in doing that?" And he said yes. So I commissioned him to do that. That is the original painting that he did for my project, and then he took off on the project because it was dear to him, and he's going to talk about that. It's a project that, like me, was very dear to my heart, and a project that we felt had not been explored hardly at all. That's how we met, and we've been very close collaborators ever since then.
It certainly rekindled my love of the Oz book series. It brought me back to my love of the Renaissance painters, and I didn't see it coming with Greg calling upon me for this particular assignment. Yeah, and it started, yes, with one image that's up in his in your studio, if you will, and it's as if um, my heart had been yearning for something like this on this level all my life. Of course, I love all the still love all the previous artwork I've produced for the Aussian community and the books I've illustrated. Uh, but I still felt something deep down inside me wasn't satisfied, and it goes back to when I was a young man, a younger artist. I'd always wanted to do my own version or produce my own version of Marvelous Land of Oz with my illustrations. And life, how it can be, things sort of get in the way. And also, there were sort of awkward things about Marvelous Land of Oz, too, that I think I allow life to get in the way, if you will, due to the nature of the story and the magical transformation that Tip suffers, if you will. So it just sort of got put on hold, and my art, fortunately though, got discovered by the Aussian community uh, through the Oz book. No, excuse me, the Wizard of Oz Collectors United got me invited all around the country to Aussian events, conventions, and just wonderful uh, Aussian celebrations. And I was hired for from the entire Aussian community to or commissioned to do a giant boatload of Wizard of Oz paintings inspired by the MGM movie. But again, deep down in my heart, I wanted to get back to the Oz book style universe, if you will, that I grew up with and inspired my art today. So Greg, he comes along down the yellow brick road. I'm forlorn, feeling very uninspired about myself. And again, no offense to the MGM vision, but that's somebody else's thing. And here I get to express more my own love of Renaissance painters and other things in my painterly vocabulary, if you will. So thank you, Greg, for hiring me. And now Greg and I we call each other brothers, and I really truly feel that. and we've come a long way with this project to date, Sam, for where we're at right now. A lot of growth creatively, I believe. Uh, Greg, do you believe that?
Yes. No,
Yeah.
it's
So
in spades, as they say.
yeah. So I appreciate all of this, and then it's given me really a legitimate reason to say hello, gang. I want to get back into the swing of things with the Aussian community. I have a lot to express with my love of Baum's universe, with the accompaniment of Greg's music, his beautiful music, his inspired music. Very, very, very deep composer. Swept me off my feet, and I knew I was in good hands with my painting. I feel we're we're platonic relationship, but we're like unrequited lovers, if you will, with the art. Wouldn't you say, Greg? We're great companions with this as creative partners, wouldn't you say?
I couldn't resist it, but we're marvelous companions, and that works
Yeah,
in several different ways.
I
So,
mean it's very professional our relationship, uh, but we've never had that kind of oh my goodness, and slam the phone moments or right, Greg? We've always
no,
kept it real.
no,
Yeah,
I mean, bonding over this story, when say two people bond over something that is as well, how do I describe the apotheosis, the grandeur and the strangeness of that story? That's when Oz really grew up, and it's never really been explored the way I wanted it to be because the story I'll give you a brief synopsis of how I came to the story. I grew up in the '60s when, of course, you only could see The Wizard of Oz once a year, and it was the talk of the kiddie water cooler. I was in fifth grade at the time, and I walked into a
mhm,
lovely little our lovely little library, which was attached to our little college, little elementary school, and I saw the white edition, the Dick Martin edition, which I didn't know that's what it was, but I said, "Oh, look, there's more Oz books." So I pulled down the second Oz book, and being 9 years old, I went to the end. I saw a picture of an unhappy boy, and I go, "Oh, okay." I go past the next page. There's this witch doing an incantation, and then I go to the next page, and there's a beautiful young girl who looks a little like the boy. And so, yeah, I did read that passage, and my little mind was blown. It's That's one of the most defining moments of my life because I am cisgendered. We're both cisgendered, and yet we're imaginative. You don't being cisgendered in the society is so absolute in a way. You've got to live up to such exacting standards, and to have this kind of thing, I've been embarrassed about it for decades, and finally, people like Vince have been able to bring this out of me. I finally couldn't stand it anymore when I was in 2020, and I composed this because I knew I had to really dig in to this story because it's phenomenal. The idea of the male and female duality and being together in the same body, and a cisgendered boy for us, a
right,
cisgendered boy and a cisgendered girl, and wow, the dynamics that are set up. So it's the entire story. We from the discovery that he discovers very early on. Of course, it's unlike the ending of the book where he only discovers at the end. It has to do with visions of the fairies. It has to do with collective visions among the people he meets, and of course, the Scarecrow and the Tin Man are there, and they get their requisite songs. Uh, but everything is prepared. I don't want this to be a secret. There are surprises that come along later on, but I don't want this to be the secret. This is the focus of Marvelous, this absolutely incredible genetic gender change, which has been covered so infrequently in classic drama, in classic literature, and even in contemporary literature, because people are, especially cisgendered males, are afraid of it. They really are, and I've been afraid of it. And as I say, Vincent
well,
has
Greg,
been.
on that point, it's magic emasculating. I mean, it's emasculating magic. I mean, why? I mean, a lot of men would, of course, would be frightened of that. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
but
transformation.
but we're not. That's the fabulous thing. And we are approaching this
Oh no.
in a unique way. We are approaching this in a unique way without the fear anymore. Thank you, Vince, for taking a lot of my fear away. And we are just diving into the great
He,
drama. And as you can
like
see,
Tip,
Vince,
he didn't run.
Yes, you
Hi.
guys are adapting and bringing to life a new adaptation of Oz, not Wizard, but Land, the Marvelous Land of Oz, Elvin Baum's second Oz book, his first sequel to the original story, and not just in any ordinary way, but opera. So, why opera and why Marvelous Land? Why this Ozpra, if you will?
well, I went to the Curtis Institute of Music once a long time ago, and not to brag, but it's Curtis and Juilliard are kind of the Harvard and Yale of music schools. They're at the top of the heap, and they have competitions and whatnot. But I've been a classical composer since I was probably 15 years old, so. As thinking as a classical composer, I thought in terms of opera, and I think let's call it an opera for the moment. The reason it's an opera is musicals generally have songs which are separated by spoken passages, and then you've got a song and a spoken passage. One of the main things that distinguishes opera is what's called through composition, which means that the music continues, and also the arias do. So it's sung pretty much all the way through. A lot of contemporary opera, though, is pretty difficult stuff. A lot of, like a lot of contemporary music. Not me. I composed this first as individual songs, and I sort of thought of it as a musical, and I was very concentrating on the tunes, actually. But the classical composer in me knew that it had to have the connective tissue of the through composition, not only because that was my training, but I just felt it needed the music specifically. And I'll make a small point about the music that for me is a little innovation that I've been wanting to do for almost 40 years since I discovered synthesizers. One thing, if you listen, and I think I sent you a small passage of Marissa Beddoes singing, you'll hear a very shining, strong chord in the background, unlike a lot of orchestral music, which it builds up some steam, but then it sort of dies down. And when opera singers start with the opera, frequently the high sopranos, people will go because there's nothing kind of in the background to sort of blunt that sharp edge. So the thing about having these synthesized strings, and I emphasize synthesized strings because they have more power than actual strings or even sampled strings. When you hear a loud soprano against it, and you hear a little bit in the track I sent, the sound is somewhat not muted, but it's kind of nicely smoothed out. It's the difference between a rough, splintery surface and a smooth surface. And I'm hopeful that that's an actual innovation in opera, specifically to kind of blunt the sound that irritates a lot of people's ears. I don't mean to have gone off subject, but that's one of my innovations that I'm very excited about.
Here it is, that little sample.
And Ozma sang.
I'm a girl and a boy. I am both proud to be, for my love for Bridget I am female, I am male, and we are
And Tip becomes Ozma.
Now, Oz and opera does make sense because Baum was often interested in the theatricals, whether it's on stage or musical or even film, so this can be quite fitting. Opera may not always be the first thing people think about when they hear Oz, but it has been featured in some aspects through the MGM musical. So here, that kind of music will be more prominent. So, for those who are not as familiar with opera, I myself am one of them. I've heard a little bit of opera music, but it's not something I listen to very often. So, for those of our listeners who are not as familiar with opera, how are you going to balance the story with the style of opera when the singing can be a little overwhelming or hard to understand?
Well, that dovetails off of what I was saying about the big kind of wall of sound, if you will. I feel like a Phil Spector there kind of blunts that. Um, Also, the fact I think that these are very much more songs. So I think that people who like musicals will recognize the song part of it more than just aria after aria after aria, because it is distinct songs and then more sung in a different kind of way, more of a talking kind of way, perhaps, and then the songs. Uh, the I think something that may help. The title of the opera, the full subtitle of it now, is an illustrated musical opera. The musical opera part is intentional to show that it's a combination of opera and the musical, and it's not an operetta. I thought about that because some people in the past have called this kind of combination an operetta, but an operetta is often a very light kind of thing. And although this has light elements to it, it's a very serious story. So I had to invent a new term for it. And of course, now it's an illustrated with Vince's magnificent work. It is an illustrated musical opera. I don't know if that answers the question at all.
Kind of
I
does,
find it,
because usually with operas there are people on stage, but in
Mhm.
this one you're hearing the music, and as you've said many times before, Vincent Myrand is providing the art and the painting, so that'll be as a backdrop. And Vincent, you were going to say or wish to elaborate on that?
well, I was going to add that when Greg approached me about this project and mentioned that the format or the musical uh, um, realm was the opera, so to speak, or the reality of all that. I didn't know what to expect because I don't just jump out of bed every day going to listen to operas. And but I appreciate the opera as an art form, as a musical art form, and I'm familiar with entry level pieces from Wagner and whatnot. And so that's sort of what I was expecting, though, is like you guys were mentioning this over the top, almost out of this world singing that almost would seem too inarticulate to capture the narrative with Baum's story. But then when Greg introduced me to the material, I found it so accessible to a non-opera fan, uh, and a warmth with his narration, and the material, that my heart was yearning to hear more about Ozma and Tip anyway. So when Greg invited me in on this project, I felt like I was in on a big secret, that things were finally being revealed correctly, if you will. And this just seems like the right way to go about it from a classical standpoint, if you will. And so upon reviewing the material more, I found the numbers, the songs very catchy, and and stuck with me as I worked on the material. And that's what has inspired me to produce about 64 works of art based on the narrative from Baum and Greg's wonderful elaborations. So I hope with what happened with me that the general audience, if you will, the Aussian audience and regular folks will find it endearing and enjoyable, and could say, I do like operas. And it will help them appreciate the opera as a musical medium, if you will, or realm, to create and generate ideas. And we hope to inspire younger generations to follow in our footsteps with this type of work. For me, I'm a classical painter, as you know, but I do found a lot of my potency. Where would I be without technology? I wouldn't even know you gentlemen. I wouldn't have been published thrice if it wasn't for the interconnection or the internet. I'm old fashioned. I come from another world, but I made it work for me. But I am a classic painter after all. So we're here to inspire with timeless material that I believe has been neglected or abused, perhaps, with some of the versions of Land of Oz out there, if you will. So please give us a chance with this. Don't let, when you hear it's an opera, scare you away. Right, Greg?
Well, as I say, that's why I've always called it it was actually almost a musical at first, as I said, and
Yeah,
I just tacked
yeah.
on the word opera because it's that's what it became it's a musical opera. I've tried to, it doesn't even have to be called an illustrated musical opera. If the idea is musical opera, just to get that going in people's heads, and then I want to still bring in the illustrated because that has a lot to do with the staging. I mean, the staging, I've almost consider it a kind of a book illustrated musical opera at this point, because the stage in Sistersville is ideally suited for this. On the left hand side we have the small orchestra, and it's a nice deep theater, so it can take the 5 or 6 musicians that are going to be there. And then on the other side, the 3 singers, Marissa Beddoes, Simon Fletcher, who is the tenor, and David Martinez, who is the baritone. The 2 of them are from the Carnegie Mellon School of Music, which is up in Pittsburgh, about 100 miles away, and very fine musicians because that's a very fine conservatory. But yeah, just the presentation, and then in the middle of this whole thing with the orchestra on the left and the singers on the right, you have the projected illustrations dominant there, and they're going to be brilliantly projected because we have a very good tech guy. So it's kind of a book opera, with leaves and there's illustration in the middle. That's another way. I throw out a lot of terms for it. So
When you say book opera, that's what I missed one thing. When I'm listening to your version of the opera, sans the hired singers or the hired hands, if you will,
yeah,
your approach to it, that my rehearsal CD makes me feel like I'm listening to one of those Disney records from when I was a kid that actually would have a picture book along with it. One of those
wow,
LPs
yeah,
from mid-century. I mean, it has that warmth and style to me. I mean, you're not trying to be Disney-esque, but it has that feeling,
hmm,
for nostalgia. I'm a nostalgia creature here. And so that's
yeah.
another thing that hooked me with this project. So now adding your professional host of musicians and singers, it'll take it to another dimension. I'm excited to experience.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And this time you are providing the pictures for the picture book.
Yeah, it's sort of like wish fulfillment because I'm sort of I get to be the feller that is creating the sort of products I wish I could have if I was still a kid, or for the kid in my heart. But the
Mhm.
big boy in me, there's a lot of discipline behind these 64 paintings, and nothing that I could have done when I was a younger person pining to illustrate Marvelous Land of Oz. I didn't have it in me then to do it this way, the way I'm doing it now. So everything happens for a reason, all in good time.
Well, it's wonderful that you're bridging these 2 worlds and these multiple worlds and platforms together, because it really is good to see a bit more attention directed to the marvelous Land of Oz, especially Ozma, Jack Pumpkinhead, and Mombi, and the Gump, and those sort of things, and the Sawhorse, and maybe even the Wogglebug at some point. So, you've mentioned Mo- Marissa Bodie, and
Marissa Beddoes, yes,
that's right, thank you. So,
yes.
what are some of the notable decisions being made with this retelling? Who else is involved? And how faithful is this adaptation? Like, is it going to be almost exactly, or just a few more enhancements, or some interesting changes?
Well, I'll approach that just because This was first conceived as a book. Actually, been taking a break from composition when the necessity of doing this struck me, and I started the rewrite as a book actually, and I tried to keep it as close to the story as I could, especially the Baum spirit. I didn't really want it to be modernized very much. The one as I going along, once you until you reach Emerald City, it's pretty much the story, truncated in places, but for time purposes. When the invading army comes, immediately knew, and it's no insult, I hope, to Baum or people who have set this with Ginger. I said that's not going to work. It's just not going to work because the story is going to become very serious, and I just don't see where Ginger and a group of an army of girls would fit in here. That was, I think, as you know, that was more for music hall purposes and for staging purposes. So I was kind of stuck on that, and I tried a couple of different things, and I didn't want to get political because it's a tricky time politically, until Vincent did the obvious thing, and he says, "Well, why don't we make the invader the Gnome King?" Because I'm taking as much as I can from a lot of the books. I have I have hindsight, which Baum did not have, so I can take the Forbidden Fountain and a lot of other things from the later books, even. So what I was able to do is I was able to rewrite it with the Gnome King, and Vince has done some wonderful paintings of the Gnome King. Basically invading Oz, and becoming the antagonist, and he becomes a necessary antagonist. As a matter of fact, the song that you played is actually the song that Ozma sings to the Gnome King, because the Gnome King is the Ginger replacement. He's been arrested by Ambi, and now he's brought before the Forbidden Fountain. I'm giving a little bit away. He's brought before the Forbidden Fountain, and Glinda says, "Before you drink of this water, do you have anything to say for yourself?" And he says, he looks at Ozma and Glinda, and he looks at Ozma, kind of leers at her, and he says, "Women, they're the worst, aren't they? King Tip." Which is like that's a dig at the masculinity, which I really needed to make. And Ozma answers him with the "I am both a boy and a girl" speech, and there's something I won't give away at the end of that. But that whole thing was very necessary to have an abusive an abusive male, if you will, for the whole male female thing. Somebody who was abusive towards both the male and female in Tip, so that Ozma could rise and sing this song about, which is kind of universal. I am a boy and a girl. Everybody, whether they want to admit it or not, is a boy, a girl, a boy and a girl in varying amounts, and I mean everybody. That is humanity. So having the Gnome King as this fellow who's abusive towards gender he was a great foil. He really was, making him that way. That's the major change I made. Also, I think the one, without giving too much away, the other big thing is the reason I started this, because I looked at Baum's book, I looked at Tip. He says, "Well, I don't know. I don't really want to become a girl." All right, I'll try it. And when he's changed, he's like, "Oh, I'm fine." No, no way. So excuse my being emphatic with that. So that's what this whole thing is about. That's the major change, that I'm really going in, and that the riches of contentment, that's pretty much intact. But what happens during the riches of contentment, especially to Ozma, is extremely different, and it leaves the opera on a very different open-ended note. It's not the happy girl Ozma forever after, because she was Tip once. She knew only being a boy. She didn't remember being a girl, and that's gonna leave a mark, as they say.
Another conspicuous or thing burden that could be for a person like Ozma, for the transition, if you will, through the magic, is that of course she started out as Tip, and Tip, who was responsible for Tip? Mombi. He answered to her, and she was very abusive to him. And he also, even though he enjoyed being outdoors, was responsible for a lot of menial tasks, servant level class tasks. So now here's Tip transformed into his rightful formation as Ozma on the throne and feeling inclined to maybe grab the broom because that would be more of Ozma's nature from experience recently having been Tip. So we're presenting it in a way that it's not as if Tip has this forebodance and these inclinations that are feminine. For as far as he knows, he's a boy and he's got to do this hard work and he has to do it often. And now, almost like overnight, he's sitting on a marble throne, surrounded by all these jewels and finery and fine clothing. So it's not just, wow, I'm this young lady princess. Well, it's just that I'm a princess. I'm not a servant boy. So there's so many layers of things to explore as musicians and artists with this material that I believe hasn't been explored enough. Just being honest, artists and musicians, if you're going to tell a good story, don't you think there'd be some residual with these characters? And I don't think anybody's adequately explored that. So here we are.
Yeah, that's right, because just briefly touching on the Gnome King saying, women, it's a very grumpy, the Disney 7 dwarf thing to do. But
yeah,
as much as I didn't like it, one of the things that NBC's Emerald City did good and was fascinating on retrospect or hindsight is the post-Tip Ozma transformation, because they do dwell on their reactions and mental processing of the transformation and the change and all that. So even though I don't think of that adaptation fondly, that character aspect is very intriguing, and it's good to bring some more light of that aspect because it's a completely different change of person. So it's necessary to delve into that character and just, just to enhance the believability of these characters. Yes, they're in the fantasy world, but they're still real people.
Yeah, well, I did see Emerald City. I kind of struggled through it because I knew there was the Tip Ozma story was supposed to be well represented, and I didn't really care for a lot of it. But near the end, when Tip is trying to be the king among the witch in front of the witches, and they're going no, 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 and he finally gives up and turns himself into Ozma. That's a pretty moving sequence. And the second one is when she's finally given the coronation and everybody kneels and she looks in the crown and she sees Tip. That influenced some of my own thought too. I found that extremely impressive, and just that was a real inkling of what should be going on with this story.
And hopefully someday we'll get more faithful film adaptations of Baum's books, and we'll be able to get a film of Marvelous Land that doesn't have the transformation be a footnote, but actually does have that character arc throughout the story, just like Aaron Toman's Chronicles of Oz adaptation with the Marvelous Land of Oz, where you do hear Ozma at the beginning, and we get the Tip and Ozma communication a bit and the complexities of that change. But there is also a lot of Oz happening this year in 2025. It's the 20th anniversary for The Muppets Wizard of Oz, the 40th anniversary of Disney's Return to Oz, the 50th anniversary of The Wiz, the 100th anniversary for Ruth Plumley Thompson's The Lost King of Oz. Plus, we are also getting a Russian adaptation of the Wizard book, which could be 2 or 3 parts, very interestingly. And we are also between the 2 releases of the Wicked films. Are there any concerns about people thinking that you may be riding the bandwagon or partaking in a cash grab with the attention with the Universal movies? Or do you think that this release of Marvelous during the break will help build the market interest for your attention?
If we pursue Marvelous as an entity that could be a franchise entity with components of merchandise, then we could have a whole realm of goods to satisfy the collector that may be dissatisfied with the market being flooded with things all wicked. No offense to wicked as a phenomenon. They may want something that may, and feel a little more book centric, if you will. The old timey people out there, or the steampunk crowd. I think for an advantage for Greg and I to uh, showcase Marvelous this particular year with all this noise, if you will, it would in the Ozian universe a clamor of all kinds of things. Uh, for instance, Return to Oz. Where did that one come from? Well, there was a lot of Marvelous Land of Oz that they sort of jumped over or discarded and sort of made the counterpoint for Ozma a connecting point with Dorothy instead of some type of mysterious apparition in the glass that looked like a boy. Tip, that was all just pitched. So it brings to light our love of Return to Oz, the things we don't like about it. So here we come along once again with our beautiful music and hopefully charming paintings, and that will strike a chord with people that are yearning for just sort of an alternative Oz, if you will, to the mainstream Oz universes, if you will.
And that's nicely put because I saw Return to Oz when it first came out as well, but Marvelous Land was very much in my mind, and I really, really hoped to see Tip become Ozma in that movie, and of course that didn't happen at all. Uh, and as just a little aside, I've produced for a couple of TED talks that I've done. I've produced a very short 10-minute musical, if you will, a 10-minute musical opera of my of Marvelous. And the first thing that I realized, I had criticized Return to Oz for not including the gender change, but the first thing I realized, if there are kids out there, and I'm talking about a gender change to the unprepared, I have to be careful. So suddenly I had a new respect for what they had to go through with Return to Oz. Howsoever, it still means that Return to Oz is an adaptation, almost like a fan fiction, if you will. So the polarity of us really, really trying to tell the story, not necessarily for the first time, but certainly trying to do it with a thoroughlessness that I have never encountered personally. I think that could be a powerful whammy too. And the fact that we're going to be doing, I really love the fact that we've been given this hour, and I'm very grateful to you guys for giving us the hour that we're going to have in June, because it's a little break from those two big Oz engines, and something a little alternative, which really tries to respect the book.
Yes, and
Yeah.
this is a very Ozma story. So we can't have Oz without Ozma, and we can't have Ozma without talking about your lead actress in some form, Marissa Meadows. So where did she come from, and what can you tell us about her?
Okay, well, I had been pursuing this I wrote the opera in 2021, and I started to promote it pretty much, in early 22. I went to a number of places, and once again, I'm very grateful to the American composer Ned Rorem, who is probably not a household name, but is considered to be a great writer of American art song, for accepting me to the Curtis Institute, because the Curtis Institute finally listened. I wrote to it a lot of different places, and the usual rejections, and even musical. I submitted it as a musical and even as an opera. But I found a wonderful fellow. Well, I'll keep nameless at Curtis, one of the alumni coordinators, who was very excited by this, and he was so supportive. And one day he kept in contact with me. This is where the grant came from, which I'll mention in a second. He came back to me once in text and he says, "Oh, there's one of our students has just appeared on America's Got Talent." This was the 2022 edition, and she's done Over the Rainbow in a whole bunch of different voices. And so, of course, I leapt right on YouTube because I don't watch America's Got Talent normally, and I went, wow. And she's beautiful and her voice is amazing and she does all these impressions, as you know. And so I wrote right back to him and I said, get me in contact. Sure enough, I got in contact with her. She loved it and she still does. She's really looking forward to it, and we've been going ahead since then. And she's been a delight to work with. And as a matter of fact, in last year, it was the year before last, it was 2023, because I'm an old graduate, so that was like 35 years ago. But she just graduated from Curtis, and there is a grant administrated called the Young Alumni Fund for people who had graduated less than 10 years ago from Curtis. So with her help, we put this under her name because she's the young alumni, and we won in 2023. We won a nice little $5,000 grant from it, not little, which has been wonderful to get. So I'm very grateful for Marissa's attention in all this, and really looking forward because she has a fabulous voice. She does opera very well because she was an opera performance major at Curtis. So I'm really looking. You heard how beautiful her voice was on that one, and I'm just looking forward to the whole opera.
You've mentioned your intentions for the show, and what are the future plans for the show?
Well, I've actually written the second half, if you will, of this, which is more of a grand opera, and it's called Ozma, but it is not based on either. It's not based on Ozma of Oz. It's not really based on any of the books because the place she ends up at the end of Marvelous leaves her so kind of divided and questioning everything. I had to do an original story, and it certainly is set in Oz, and it involves the familiar characters, and it also I thought to myself, how am I going to introduce the Cowardly Lion? And I was very proud of the way that came together. I really was. That's for a little later, but this essentially takes the story right from the throne room, where, of course, that's where the riches of contentment ends up, in the throne room, right from her divided mind there. 20 minutes later, after everybody has left, and she has her own soliloquy at this point, in which she's really meditating intimately about what is going on. And it takes us through a whole lot of stuff, including a potential romance, which is a whole bam, with a prince. Actually, it's Prince Inga. I've brought in Prince Inga of Pingaree because that's nice to sing Prince Inga of Pingaree, and that doesn't quite go as you might expect either, because the ghost of Tip, if you will, is there, and that it doesn't. Once again, it leaves a mark, but it ends up essentially at the end of time-wise, if you will, or psychologically, at the end of Emerald City, when Baum really tried to close it off. And the idea is closing off Oz at this point. And a lot of things are resolved, but a lot of things are still not resolved. So that, once the two are together, Marvelous is about 80 minutes long. Ozma is about an hour long. So it's going to be a grand opera eventually, 2.5 hours, the whole shebang, staging all kinds of stuff. That's a big future plan for me, and I've got feelers already. I've got a lot of interest in this, and I'm proud to say that I've got feelers. So we also probably will be doing Marvelous again, since it in some ways might be more approachable, and I would love to do more performances of it. That's why we're doing a very thorough audiovisual documentation of it. But eventually, I want this to be done as the grand opera. I think I'll still call it Marvelous or Marvelous Oz, just to distinguish it. Part 1 is Tip, Part 2 is Ozma.
Wonderful. So, I thought this was going to be hypothetical, but it sounds like this would affect the next Ozma book timeline. So this marvelous opera, illustrated opera, could and possibly could not fit in again with the other Baum books, but I guess time will tell then.
Yeah, we will. And as I say, I thought about making it along the lines of Ozma of Oz, but I've taken many elements, let me say, in the opera Ozma, but it's so much her story, and unfortunately, in a way, Baum kind of sidelines her in a lot of ways throughout. You know, she's there and she'll tell the story of Tip. That he wasn't afraid to retell that story, but so often she's kind of comes in at the end and gives her blessing to the other people's adventures. This is she is absolutely the central character. So it was difficult to put it into Baum's world in that sense. But you know, but Vincent is going to keep painting, I hope, and still illustrating this because the idea of the illustrated opera, I think, is very powerful. Even before I met Ozma, a lot of people said, "Well, this needs to be animated, or this needs to be, a cartoon or an animation of some sort." But it's so much more penetrating, I think, as this illustrated book opera with Vince doing his illustrations. I don't know if you want to say anything about that, Vince, because it is
Oh
our
yes, of course.
and
I was thinking about all the paintings I want to do further, and that how
exactly.
exciting it is that um, I've been bound by certain restrictions format wise with the Land of Oz, which has been swell. But then I get on with this project with you, and I'm seeing these kind of Oz paintings I never thought I could do or would, I mean, exist. But here they are, and I'm moved by them because I can experience them as a Oz fan, not as the producer that just loves his babies. I can get outside of it and experience it and love it that way. So when you say, yeah, there's a future for Ozma in my hands as a composer, and I'd love to have Vince produce more paintings. I was just daydreaming about, wow, what wonders and sights. That's where I was just a moment ago. So yes, I'm very excited. Yes.
What I'd like to do is I'd like for if possible, Vince, to take us on a small tour of a few, since you've got so many of them there, on a small tour of a couple of the paintings, since you've got a mobile phone. Is that possible?
Here's a nice one. It's a sensitive one, and Greg can explain it though. The moment that why it's such a tender moment, I guess, or it leads to some also almost a crisis moment.
Yes, and
If you want to have any spoilers,
I'll spoil the story a little bit, just a little bit. You notice this is pretty obviously when Jack and Tip find the sawhorse, and the sawhorse here has not been brought to life, and so they're just sitting idly. You know, this is a boy and his and his created pumpkin man. They're out in the sunshine, just relaxing, and Tip idly carves his name on the horse's neck. And if you've ever looked in detail, this is where this idea came from. If you've ever looked in detail at the very first illustration in Marvelous Land of Oz, you'll notice that there is a tip carving with a penknife down there. It's not always noticeable, but when I saw that when I was composing the opera, my mind was blown, and I said, "What can I do with that?" Because that's a casual, boyish moment. But what's coming up for Tip is not casual and boyish. So it turns out, without too much of a spoiler, that during the coronation, when the now very feminine Ozma is about to mount the throne, and she's riding the sawhorse, she looks down as the song says, and she sees Tip's carving the name on the horse's neck. And then there's what we call a grand pause, and she thinks, or it was thought, but it wasn't her name anymore. So this is an example of a very casual little moment turning into a great moment of crisis later on. And I do that in a couple of ways. And as you see, Vince has helped me tremendously in visualizing this.
you can mention something about describe this one.
Um, Another part, and once again, I'll try not I know I'm giving spoilers, but that's all right. It's all right. This beautiful, beautiful thing. One of the it takes about more than a third of the opera, the whole transformation process. Very little of it is physical, most of it is metaphysical. That's an important point I want to add, that this is a very metaphysical transformation because it's very mental. And when Ozma finally emerges, the classic scene, she does emerge beautifully, but then she stumbles because she's unused to her body. But Glinda had prepared for this moment. She invokes Lurline, who has already appeared a couple of times with the fairies. She invokes the spirit. She invokes Lurline, who was, of course, left Oz a long time ago, mostly because of the wizard and whatnot, and the arrival of humans. And she comes, and as you can see in the painting, there's Ozma on the right, there's Lurline on the left, and there's Glinda underneath. Glinda is doing the evocation. These two are spinning, and I almost don't want to spoil what happens, but this is how Ozma gets her final femininity from her mother. This is a scene this is an addition, and that's all I'm going to say about it because there's a lot of details I do not want to give away. That is the incredible painting that Vince has done for this evocation, and it's it's basically it's the creation, it's the final block in the wall that creates Ozma, makes her a full woman again.
And because you mentioned earlier the transformation, it's not like this cut and dry magic, if you will. And so to illustrate the situation of a transformation, Greg, do you want to explain how we work this number into it?
The wonderful thing about this is our metaphysical this is Vince's metaphysical representation of the transformation during the spell. And as you can see, it's alternating tip Ozma, as Ozma becomes clearer, and in a sense Tip becomes vaguer, because that's taken right from a line. As Ozma's form grew stronger and Tip's vaguer, she sings him a long song. But this is the transformation, and we use this in a way in which it's, first it's strongly Tip, then a little bit of Ozma, but as you keep moving to the left, this of course is the couch in the in Glinda's royal tent where Mombi performs the actual transformation. So you can see it's a kind of rather than it being an actual body transformation, it's more of a metaphysical thing where the faces are changing.
What's this here for you, Greg? What would this mean to you?
Well, there's a famous painting by he's a late 18th century painter called Fuseli. I think it's not Henry Fuseli. I can't remember his first name. It's called The Nightmare, and it shows a woman supine like this, with an evil little troll sitting on her chest and looking at her lasciviously, and the beaded eyes of a strange goblin horse. So this is a take on The Nightmare. But of course, this is Ozma, and this is Tip, and this is the sawhorse. So once again, the metaphysical implications are, I hope, loom very large in the imagination, because he's done several of these. He's taken a few classic paintings and he's reworked them within the context of the Marvelous Land, and specifically the transformation and the balance between Tip and Ozma. It's a wonderful work.
Thank you, Greg. And excuse me for my rough camera work, but I want to show you folks this one here that sort of illustrates things in another way, if you will.
Mm. Yes, this is one of two clocks, the Tip Ozma clock. This is the more kind of casual one. When Tip is upright, he is the prominent one. But if you turn it 90 degrees, then Ozma becomes the prominent one. And that's used, that kind of clock thing is used if Tip is prominent or if Ozma is prominent, because there are many shades of meaning where they're in between, or one is the other and the other, you know what I'm saying. Sometimes Tip rises up and sometimes he goes away. So it's like a clock that shows who's dominant, if you will. And of course, the hub of it is a pumpkin, because the pumpkin is very significant to both Tip and Ozma. And it's a beautiful painting.
Thank you, Greg. Let's see, what would be another one to showcase that would be nice?
Well, you did a nice one of the Scarecrow and the Tin Emperor just behind you. Very much like the book.
Oh, thank you very much. And we mentioned, just for the sake of being an illustrator and thorough, we mentioned the Gnome King and his invasion. I wanted to
Exactly.
show you all this one here. This was a lot of work. When an author in his stories has scenes or sequences that involve large amounts of people, crowds, armies, that can be an illustrator's worst nightmare to compose a picture where there's a myriad of characters. So here we go. This was definitely a visual challenge for me to put this together.
Oh yeah, that's that's a beauty. There you can of course see the Tip and Jack and the Scarecrow escaping on the sawhorse. But there's the Gnome King. That's another. This completely solidifies why choosing the Gnome King and his minions was such a nice and very Aussie choice here.
Oh yeah, I think it's a nod to the Emerald City in a way, Greg.
It absolutely is the Gnome King's invasion of the Emerald City.
Yeah, the Emerald City of Oz. You know where that is the main kind of thing
Right.
uh, that they rotate with the tour of Oz with Uncle Henry and Aunt Em. So yeah, that's a little teaser of some of the artwork. Oh, one more that might be
Oh
fun.
my.
You can see a little closer. It's been around here. You've seen it throughout the program, but here's Ozma. And oh, I'm sorry, the lighting is poor in here.
Yeah. And I'll give you just a little giveaway. This is the final painting in that is shown during Marvelous, and everything is so beautiful about it. But if you look at her face, you can see that's the mood she's in. It's not a regal, oh, I am now Queen Ozma. She has been through the ringer, and everything looks so beautiful, and she's so gorgeous. But wow, what is in her mind is just,
Your
Complexity.
shoes are capped.
oh yes,
Yeah,
Yeah, she's in a very complicated, complex emotional state, understandably
yes,
so.
yeah, against the beauty of everything in the Emerald City.
and here she is again,
But as you
like
can
that.
see, oh, during the coronation, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, can I show you folks this one a little closer? I'm very excited about Ozma's gown. I painted her legs first and let that portion of the painting dry thoroughly. Then I put an overlay glaze for her gown, which is actually gossamer or see-through paint. And so when you see this painting in person, it's like seeing actual fabric that's gossamer.
Yes.
It's quite an illusion when you see this painting.
That is the masterpiece. That is just that's
Oh,
the
Magnificent.
coronation, of course. Yeah.
here's some light, better light for it here.
Woo.
Magnificent.
Yeah, it's
See how you can
amazing.
see through it and it looks sort of lacy? You
Mm-hmm.
could 3 or 4 layers there so that you get the feeling of you got the green marble, then you have the highlights of the gown cascading down the stairs. Then you get sort of this little tease of her nice legs, her gams, but we don't
Mhm.
want to, be in a provocative way. We just want to suggest that she's got such a potent feminine allure, and that it's making her very awkward because she's used to being again a lowly servant boy running around in the woods getting firewood or milking the 4-horn cow. Now all of a sudden, all this pomp and circumstance, right? So
Yeah.
we want to show a person that's sort of like femme fatale. She's got something going on, and that is causing these gentlemen. They makes her seem even more appealing and attractive. Something about a woman in distress, right, with classic gentlemen, and which creates more anxiety in her
Yeah.
when they seem to have 2 left feet and they're all thumbs around her, and she's
And do you
not
want to give
accustomed to
away
that sort of
sorry.
thing. Yeah.
Do you want to give away? No, that's all right. You go ahead.
Oh no, I'm just saying that as the fragile human creature that she is now, she's still adjusting to the world of all this pomp and circumstance and social convention, and then it's all of a level of she's the princess, all this responsibility of leadership suddenly overnight. So it must be also very exciting, of course. So it's not like like as if we're saying, oh, this is the worst thing ever to happen to a person. It's just that we feel like, back to what Greg was saying earlier with the Oz book series, and we love Baum's treatment of the characters, but we just feel there's room to explore more with Ozma as an individual character outside of being in the glow or the influence or perimeter of Dorothy or all the other characters we love so much. Greg, the fact that he's willing to take on more with Ozma as a character, with more music and more of opera, that thrills me. I would love to write more myself. I used to want to be an Oz book author and illustrator all in one, but I just got taken by painting and art so much. So thank you so much, Greg, for having me. Couldn't do it without you. This Oz venture.
Thank you so much for bringing this to visual life. And I would like to show one painting of Vincent's, a painting that my last trip to Sistersville, which was a few months ago, it rode in my front seat in pride of place and kept me wonderful company. This beautiful gem. Now, I came up with a scene in Ozma where Tip's axe became significant, and just to really truncate it, Vince has a wonderful painting of Tip out in the forest, swinging his axe. And the song is, "I am Tip, a boy, a man I shall be." But later on, during some of the transformation and after the transformation, what is happening here, if you look at the faces and you see the axe, this is the axe. This is the symbolic handover. You see his face is full of concern, Tip, as if he's saying, I'm giving you everything I am. I'm giving you my life. Take care of my axe. Take care of me. And look at her expression. It's almost kind of naive. This is the kind of poetry that Vince has brought to this incredible story. I came up with the idea of the axe, but then he brings this intense and beautiful poetry to it. And that's one of the major and beautiful things that I really want our illustrated musical opera to convey, the poetry of this and how relevant it is to so many things today, but to all of human life, the whole spectrum. Like what Ozma is going through there up on the throne. Oh, every feeling in the world, just amazing.
Oh, yeah. And Greg, can I add something about that picture?
Oh, yeah.
Fans, if you're sharp, the gestures I borrowed from John Arneal, Rinky-Tink of Oz. And Sam noted that. He detected that. He's very sharp.
Excellent. Yeah. See, that's not something
I like getting inspiration from physical gestures, and then I dress up my characters the way I need to if I need a model, for instance. I've always loved that picture from Rinky-Tink of Oz, and so suddenly I just saw it redressed within this story that's exploring the dichotomy or the situation Tip Ozma, and so it led to a whole batch of paintings with Ozma embracing Tip's axe in ways of sort of like a repose, nostalgia, or forlorn, and there was nothing scripted. Greg wasn't, tasking me, if you will. These things were just coming to me, these images, and he's like, wow, this is fitting into Ozma, right?
Oh, well, as I say, that storyline, so much of this just came to me. I like to say, and I hope it's not pretentious, sometimes because this opera, it presented itself to me and demanded to be written. I know that sounds pretentious, but I like to say that this wrote me, and Vince had a very similar thing where he just ran with it. He just took this initial idea up here, just ran with it. So I like to say, this idea painted you, you didn't paint this idea. And that with all the little sub meanings, because it's like painting him it's painting his soul. It's painting the opera, but it's painting the opera and the story, but it's also painting his soul, much as it's writing my soul. It's something we couldn't not do.
Well, yes, at this point, you're right. It's like that. Stephen King, the author, mentioned there's nothing like, I'm not quoting him word for word, but there's nothing like when you feel like that typewriter is just going that staccato, almost like a machine gun, and you're like a conduit, and the story you're telling, it's coming through you. You're a conduit. It's like you have no control. It feels like, and that's where a lot of these images, I'll get hit with something, and I'll have to grab my sketchbook or the paint and get it down. And Greg's seen that, and then it'll fit in some magical, symbolic, mannerist, or whatever way, right, Greg?
Well, Vince draws from so many eras of painting, but we both have a great passion for what are known as the symbolist painters of the late 19th century, largely French painters
Mostly,
like
yeah.
who are not that well known. Gustave Moreau, Delacroix sort of fits in there, but a lot of painters who were not as well known as a lot of the Impressionists, but who were very classically trained, who did a lot of classical imagery. And unlike the Impressionists, who were kind of
And
going towards vagueness, the precision. I'm going to let you speak about that.
I just wanted to add, Greg, with Gustave Moreau and the Impressionists, though, a curious footnote and irony is that he was a teacher to Matisse in a way, and
Yes.
and led Matisse into a lot of symbolist realms, if you will, but in the Impressionist manner, if you will. But yeah, Moreau is one of my favorites. Anyway, I'll let you continue. I just wanted to add there's a connection with Matisse and Moreau.
Yeah, Ringatink may not always be a favorite amongst Oz fans. It's certainly not one of my favorites, because of the Oz tack on at the end when it was originally a Oz-related book, something more of
Hmm.
its own. But, uh, that's digressing. But it really is nice to see that reference to a less preferred Oz book. And
A
so
lot
the
of it was.
main question I have
Oh, sorry.
now is, where can people see this performance and find out more about it? Is there a link or a website?
Yeah, my website is my name, Gregory, just like it's presented there, Gregory Hall, but of course without a space between the Y and the H, gregoryhall.org. It's not .com, that's a common mistake. I was lucky enough to grab that name, though, because it's a somewhat common name like 20 years ago or so, but I had to put .org on it because .com was already taken. So not .com, but .org. And there's a lot of information in there. There's a whole visual art gallery of Vince's work there, accolades. And there's also a mention of where, and when it's going to be. And I'll mention that just right now. And I'll also let Vince come in. Once I've mentioned the date and time, I'll let him come in a little bit. It's going to be April 5th of this year in Sistersville, West Virginia, which is about 40 miles south of Wheeling, West Virginia, where the main interstate goes through, about 80 or 90 miles from Pittsburgh. Beautiful, beautiful little town on the Ohio River. It used to be, I'm taking some of what you would say about it, Vince, but it used to be a very wealthy little town. And they have a glorious little theater there called the Gaslight Theater. It's almost like a big recording studio. It's well baffled, but the most magical thing is that the exit, when people have seen it and seen all the paintings, they will exit out into this magnificent gallery in which all the paintings will be hanging. And I'm going to let you talk about that a little bit, Vince,
Oh
if you
well,
don't mind.
it'll be a great way to have like a reception with Marissa Beddoes, and we'll have prints available that she can autograph of the portrait I rendered of her, and then we'll have all of the paintings framed in in the gallery proper, and it'll be in addition to the opera show that they just experienced. Um, they're seeing the paintings projected, so they get to actually see the works of art firsthand after. That'll be a nice way to wrap it up, I think. Don't you agree, Greg?
It couldn't be better. And of course, I've done that. I've done that path between the theater and down the stairs to right into the gallery. There's a lovely piano there. It's a beautiful space. I don't know what the exact dimensions. I think it'll be able to. I hope it's going to be able to fit all the paintings. But it's going to be. They're going to be stacked 2 and 3 high, like the old art galleries you see in some of the 19th century. The folks who, especially the Americans, who would go around and paint the galleries of the day, like the Louvre, and you have these 3 and 4 stacked walls. So it's probably going to be a little like that. It's like some of the old 19th century galleries.
And you'll be helping me frame those paintings, Greg.
Oh, sure. That's why I'm coming early. But that's
It's
pretty much
exciting.
the details, and I reiterate those details on gregoryhall.org.
And is it a one night thing only, or is there a weekend?
It's one night only, mostly because we're going to be, as I say, highly well documenting it. That's almost more important than the performance at this point. So in a sense, even if we just get a small audience, that's still a great thing, because the documentation is everything going forward into the future, to show people what the possibilities of this show really are. And you need a full performance of this, and that's kind of one of the main focus. But I'd love to have people come, because that's why I'm doing it live. I want people to experience this in the context of live theater. In a digital age, I could have done it 100 different ways. I could have made an opera film. I could have made an animated thing, Vince animating or whatever. But we just or recorded it on a CD and just had it done like that. It needs the live element, because everything here is analog and in a sense trying to be true, trying to be real. Vince's art is from the ground up. It's made from his brilliance, and I wrote this from the ground up. And I just want that. And being a traditional classical composer, I really respect the idiom of live theater. So I want this to be prominently a live theater experience.
And I hope someday that there may be possibly a video or DVD release, or at very least a streaming service, so that when the performances are done, then it should be preserved for longevity and for future revisits. Though I would highly recommend a DVD version, because that's easy to revisit and doesn't rely on Wi-Fi, passwords, connections, or it's something tangible, something physical you can actually look back on, replay, and just need a working player for. So yes, I look forward to seeing this in its entirety at some point this year. So wonderful. Back to Baum.
Yes. Thank you so much, Sam.
Thank you both so much for talking about your piece and bringing so much more attention to this. It's really been fascinating, and I really do hope to see you guys all in OzCon in June 20 to 22nd this year. I hope I got the dates correctly. But yes, thank you so much for bringing more attention to Ozma and her complex predicament and her fascinating story and coming out revelation, as it were, and for bringing more attention to the opera and art, and just wonderful to have you guys be here. And just, it's been a pleasure and a delight and a privilege even. So thank you guys so much.
It's been a wonderful, thank you for asking such great questions, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you for all your answers.
Yeah, I appreciate it. This was really fun this evening.
Good luck with the show. Good
Thank
luck
you so
with
much,
the presentation.
Sam, and for letting us rattle on about it. Certainly, me rattle on. I mean, Vince's presentation it's wonderful. He can go all around the place and show all this magnificent art, and he vouchsafed me these so I could show a little bit too.
Yes, thank you, Sam, and thank you, Colin, out there for helping coordinate all of this. And we look forward to seeing the Oz gang in June as well. We're very excited to just see everyone and share the joy, about all this. We love it.
So I wish you all the best. We have OzCon International coming up in June. You will see the performance there, but you will get the main attraction in April. So go to the websites that Greg Hall has provided and we'll see you soon. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so
Thank you.